in my office. He's done some really good, solid, very solid, non-partisan constituent stuff during the crisis, and your office has been helpful.
Thank you. And he has been a good partner to work with, as have you.
Yeah. Well, and so has Minister Champagne in the rescue missions, which are continuing still. I see there's still some people that are trying to get home.
All right, why don't we get started? Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Especially thank you to our three esteemed guests for taking time out of your busy schedules. My name is Naina. For those who don't know me, I'm the president of Students Supporting Israel at U of T. So why don't we get started with each official sharing for 5 to 10 minutes a little bit about themselves, their experience fighting anti-Semitism within their careers, and their perspectives and any thoughts they have on this issue. Minister Mendicino will start us off, followed by MP Kent, followed by Councillor Pasternak. For the audience, please keep your mics muted, and if you have any questions, please message me privately in the chat. So with all that being said, why don't we get started? And Minister Mendicino, why don't you start us off?
Well, thank you very much, Naina, and it's great to be with you and with all of the other peers at University of Toronto, and a belated Shana Tova. I hope that everybody's enjoyed the high holidays with their family. I realize this year has been a bit different for all of us. We just came off of Thanksgiving weekend, and COVID-19 has certainly had to change lives and is changing the way that we're going about our daily lives. And before I get into the substance of my remarks this morning, or this afternoon, sorry, I just want to say that it is a great privilege to be a member of parliament that gets to work so closely with the Jewish community. It's been one of the true hallmarks of my career, and I don't just come by it professionally. I have family that are Jewish, and this is a very personal issue for me. And just getting to know the community and understanding what are the issues that we need to face together is such an incredibly important part of my work. And so being able to take the opportunity tonight to talk about anti-Semitism and how we are fighting this together, because I don't think that this is a partisan issue, at least it should not be. And I'm very fortunate to be able to work with the likes of both Peter Kent, who is an esteemed colleague of mine who sits across the aisle, but also James Pasternak, who's a city councillor up in North Toronto, and my former colleague, but forever friend, Michael Levitt, who was the MP that had initially been invited. And I'm always happy to stand in for Michael, and a big mazel tov to him for continuing his advocacy on behalf of the community. We're meeting tonight at a very unprecedented moment, and this pandemic, this once in a century pandemic, has had a very significant impact on our daily lives, as I said earlier, and regrettably, it's set the conditions for a rise in anti-Semitism, and I'm going to explain why I think that's the case, and hopefully throughout the course of the evening, try to identify some of the things that our government has undertaken to try and create a society that is free from hate and the world's oldest hate. And the fact is that this is well documented, that incidents of anti-Semitism and hatred towards the Jewish community have seen a sharp increase. There are organizations like the B'nai B'rith that undertake an audit every year. I have spoken in the House of Commons to shed a light on those alarming trends. And as a former federal prosecutor, somebody who's worked on the front lines of the criminal justice system, I think we really have to put our heads together to try and find new ways to reduce these incidents. And there have been some very tragic, difficult, heart-wrenching moments over the last few years, which I think illustrate that this is not an abstract phenomenon, that this is real, that it's felt by the community. I think about the incidents at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, where I was able to go and grieve with synagogues in the community in my riding, where I could see it, in the faces, the ashen faces of the members of the community for whom, this really was the beginning of a much more anxious era. And then San Diego, but it's not just those terrible tragedies. There are incidents of anti-Semitism that exist on a continuum that range from the most heinous, murderous acts like those to incidents involving the harassment of young Jewish students, like around the corner from my constituency office at Bathurst and Lawrence, where 7 young boys who go to the local yeshiva there were bullied and harassed, and that involved a criminal investigation. I met with those boys. I met with the local rabbis. I was able to look them in their eyes and see both their concerns, but their resilience. And that gave me hope that that the community does rally around itself, but equally the surrounding communities of other faiths, including my faith, as well as the Muslim community, who formed rings of peace around synagogues, around some of the most difficult moments that I've just described. And likewise, this past weekend, when a mosque in the GTA was threatened, to see community leaders step up from the Jewish community and condemn those acts, I think is the shining beacon of that Canadian spirit, where we look after one another and where we don't just tolerate, but we actually embrace our identity and our religion. So, you know, I think there's a lot to unpack from there, and I know that we're going to get into some questions, but certainly there is a lot of work to do around the adoption and the implementation of the definition of anti-Semitism under IRA. And I'm very proud of the government's work about that. We've also introduced some funding under the Security Infrastructure Program, which has benefited many of the local schools and synagogues in my riding and elsewhere. And I think we need to continue to work across party lines to fight anti-Semitism, because regrettably, it's still part of our society.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Thank you, Marco.
MP Kent, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Nina. And it's great to join colleagues Marco and James in this call tonight, and on this particularly important topic. The COVID lockdown has had a terrible impact, a negative impact on tolerance in not only Canadian society, but society across North America and around the world. And it has spawned the spectrum of hatreds in our society, particularly in the matter of anti-Semitism. And we see it in any number of ways, in any number of hateful expressions, some of them verbal, some of them in vandalism, and some of them in physical threats. In my former life as a journalist over 40 years, I saw the world's oldest hate up close in situations around the world in its most brutal form, in situations like coverage of the Yom Kippur War in 1973 and the several intifadas in the 80s and 90s and into this century. I've seen it on university campuses before I became a politician. As a journalist, I can remember in 2002 in Montreal, when Benjamin Netanyahu arrived to begin a speaking tour across Canada and was blocked from entering Concordia University as the Montreal riot police stood by and allowed a huge group of pro-Palestinian protesters, led by a number of agents provocateurs international students, some of whom were eventually convicted of embezzlement and fraud of student funds at Concordia. And Concordia solved that problem. It was a chronic problem at Concordia by that time. And what they did eventually, and it has greatly decreased anti-Semitism on the Concordia campus, they eliminated single subject international students, many of whom were being funded from abroad to come and basically to agitate and to act as agents provocateurs. I've also seen it up close at York University, just across the street from Steeles Avenue, the southern border of the riding of Thornhill, and was involved particularly during the previous administration of President Shukri with the annual student election, the Federation of Students, where all sorts of incredible, unacceptable conduct was taking place, intimidation of Jewish students from participating in those votes, intimidation and discouragement of observers of the election count, ballot boxes that floated around, all sorts of suspicions of counterfeit ballots. And I was disappointed then. I'm less disappointed now with the current president of York, but I still have some issues in the administration standing aside and saying the university can't intervene in the affairs of the student union and the student hall. And anyone familiar with York University knows that on any given day, it can be a real challenge to run the gauntlet of both low-key and insidious, as well as more physical and verbal hate. And many Thornhill constituents of mine who've gone to York University have actually de-identified, either haven't participated in the student union at all, or gone to the fast food shops in the hall, or have even reduced the physical attributes of Jewishness, the kippah and the Star of David. As a member of Parliament, I was honored, and there was a very positive moment back after I was elected in 2008 when we created the Canadian Parliamentary Coalition to Combat Anti-Semitism. It was across all parties initially, although the Bloc Québécois dropped out. And in 2010, we hosted an international conference, this coalition of parliamentarians against anti-Semitism, and passed the Ottawa Protocol, which Canada became the first to sign, and was hailed again by the leaders of the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, and the NDP, not the Bloc. The Bloc was still siding with those who saw any action to identify and work against anti-Semitism as an encroachment, in their eyes, of free speech. So I think I'll leave it there. I know that there are a number of very relevant questions coming up. Marco touched on some of them, and I'm sure James will as well. But it's a real honor. It's a pleasure, if it can be a pleasure, to participate in this sort of session. But it's a real honor to take part in this discussion tonight.
Thank you so much. Councillor Pasternak, if you're ready.
Great. Well, thank you for this gracious invitation and the opportunity to share a few words. Always tough to follow two remarkable MPs who've been great friends of the Jewish community, who've been strong voices against racism of all kinds, and of course, strong fighters against anti-Semitism. And, you know, I look at what's going on in society today, and I would say that fighting racism and anti-Semitism is sort of the moral imperative of our time. And yet 2 millennia of anti-Semitism continues to raise its ugly head. And our time is no different. You know, I'll talk from a municipal perspective. I wanted to go into politics when I was about 10 years old. And when I reached my mid-40s, I figured I better start or the clock is gonna tick and I'm gonna run out of time. So I originally I wanted to run for city council. And one thing that appealed about city council, and it's not against my good colleagues in Ottawa, is there's no political parties at City Hall. So I wanted to speak my mind. I wanted to advocate. Party discipline was not really my thing. But of course, we do have a strong mayor system. So I ran for the school board, and not only did I want to do public service because I had worked in an MP's office in New Brunswick, and of course at Queen's Park, but I also wanted to be an advocate for Jewish causes. And I thought they would come up on occasion, and we would deal with them, and I would speak out, and we would do everything we can. And as I came to City Hall 10 years ago, municipalities grew as a stronger level of government, remembering that 80% of Canadians live in cities and urban areas. And our mayors across the city, across the country, became more and more influential. And they caught the ear of not only our provincial capitals, but of course, our prime ministers as well, whether it was former Prime Minister Harper or Prime Minister Trudeau. So I came to council at a time where urban areas, municipalities were flexing their muscles as strong voices in a number of different public policy issues. And one of them was racism. So over the years, I mean, when I arrived at the school board, I'll just give you a quick summary because I don't want to drone on too long. Of many of the insidious and disturbing situations that we had to deal with while I was on the school board, and then I'll transition onto City Hall. So on the school board, one of the first things we dealt with was a very offensive book. It was a children's book called The Shepherd's Granddaughter, which was page after page of demonizing the Jewish community, demonizing Israel. And the Canadian Library Association gave one of the most poorly written books I've ever seen an award. So many of the advocates of this book became referred to it as an award-winning book. And we did everything we could to contain its distribution. And I know book banning is something that makes everybody feel uncomfortable, and I certainly did at the time. And at the end of the day, what we were able to achieve was having it behind the counter and taught in context of other issues. The next thing we had to deal with was a group called High Schools Against Israeli Apartheid, which popped out of nowhere, and students of Israeli extraction complained to us. I'm not going to go into detail of all these issues, but when I arrived at City Hall, the big fight was a group called Queers Against Israeli Apartheid, which participated in Pride Parade, which was a city and provincially funded parade on municipal property. And this was a really offensive group who used the racial slur of Israel apartheid outwardly in their signage and their chants and their yelling as they were walking down one of the main boulevards in the street. And I can get into more detail in answering your questions on the efforts we had to go through to try and get it removed. Then came incidents of white supremacists gathering on Toronto Public Library space, the Al-Quds rally that was originally given permits at Queen's Park, a poster campaign on TTC buses called The Incredible Shrinking Palestine, a racist publication that went out to various communities across the city called Your Ward News. And of course, as Peter's referenced, the mayhem at York University, which we've met with the leadership there on many occasions. In response to this, and I have to go through this quickly, we worked hard to update the city's anti-discrimination policy. We created a legal framework to deal with and respond to hate rallies. We reviewed our permit policy. We went to the media. We issued statements. We had public outrage. But we also did positive things. We did the Israeli flag raising, which was not taking place at City Hall when I arrived here. We had a very large gathering for International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And we did celebrations of good things, such as Rosh Hashanah, Hanukkah, Purim, and of course, we went to the media. When I was trying to stop hate rallies, I went on live TV and the reporter asked me, how do you know it's hate? And I said, look, when someone's walking up University Avenue with a swastika, they're not collecting for the United Way. And then he said, well, what about free speech? And I said, well, what about the rights of others? What about the rights of people to go about their daily lives without harassment, without demonization, without prejudice? What about their rights? And then we went on from there. So just very quickly to wrap up, because I don't want to take up too much time, some of the things that are making our lives more difficult is are various forces that work against us in trying to deal with these various issues. And I'll just quickly go over a few. The charter, not so much the Charter of Rights, but the Supreme Court decisions over the years have leaned very heavily on the free speech side. And it's not enough to be offended or insulted by what's being said. It has to be repugnant and vilifiable and threatening for us to get to that threshold of hate speech. And also there's when we were dealing with York University, there was a real fear there with the leadership that if they came down too strong on some of these anti-Israel groups and anti-Semitic groups, there would be riots in the street. I think there's a general feeling also that the Jewish community has done fairly well. You know, they're better off than many other groups. What are they complaining about? And that's a very difficult thing to deal with. I mean, everybody, no matter what their lot in life, has a right to freedom and dignity and free from harassment. Social media is another area that we're fighting against and is making things worse. You know, we have a situation now at the city where we're investigating the history of Henry Dundas, who is, there's a big street here named Dundas Street and Dundas Square and Dundas subway station. So get this one, we're investigating a guy who's been dead for 200 years at a cost of $250,000, and we can't get a store called Food Benders closed, which has a sign outside saying no Zionists welcome. So there's an entrenched deep state in many jurisdictions. I don't know whether you see it as much in Ottawa, but I see it here at City Hall. You know, Al-Quds Day got permits from the Sergeant at Arms at Queen's Park to march on their grounds for many years. An art exhibit that went to Ottawa City Hall and Mississauga City Hall, which was really just a touring exhibit for glorifying terrorism, got Ontario Arts Council funding. And QAIA, as I mentioned before, Queers Against Israeli Apartheid, received City of Toronto money, which I avoided that vote for many years, and of course, Province of Ontario money. With police services, I would just simply say their philosophy these days are to de-escalate and to make sure there's no more than a bunch of yelling and shouting. And they're very reluctant to get involved in any overt way to deal with many of these hate rallies. So in a time of instability, we see anti-Semitism raising its ugly head. I had put in here as a list of things working against us and exacerbating the situation is the gong show south of the border and what's going on there. We watch it very closely. To what degree the current administration in Washington is exacerbating the situation or groups that follow him, that's a matter of conjecture, but I throw it out there for debate. At the end of the day, I think we've had a good response at City Hall. We've not given in to many of these groups. We have responded with motions of council, with bylaws and directions to staff to act and to take firm action. And we have a mayor who's committed to that. And that will come up in the question and answer period. But the bottom line is getting involved, responding, not rolling over, letting them know that there'll be a response is crucial to how we deal with many of these challenges that are taking place. And one thing I can say is that if they're trying to wear us down, we're ready for the battle. And that's where we step up to the plate with our legal framework, with our hate rally policies, with our police services, and any other mechanism that we have to respond and to make sure that anti-Semitism and hate does not rear its bloody head, its ugly head at the City of Toronto, a wonderful city that's known worldwide for its respect, for its diversity, and for its tolerance. And that's what we're working at City Hall. So I'll wrap up there and try and incorporate some other comments in the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to all three of the officials. I don't know how to express how much this means to all of us U of T students. So why don't we get into the Q&A period? I'll put out the first two questions and anyone who has an answer can go ahead. The first question is, what do you recommend as the best ways to get involved in policy and combating anti-Semitism, both on campuses and in government itself? And the second question is, what government resources are available to students who are dealing with anti-Semitism on campus?
Well, I'm happy to take a first crack and then pass it over to Peter and to James. But the first thing I want to do is build on what we said in the introductory remarks, and I agree wholeheartedly with the broad strokes of the comments that were made by both Peter and James. But I think the key piece is for students to be engaged, for young people to be engaged on this issue. And I know that because anti-Semitism is a real thing that occurs on our campuses, and having spoken with many students and parents who are, concerned about that and frustrated that that being able to go to campus and take your education, take those next steps towards a career and in life should be free from all forms of hatred and discrimination and bias, and that this is something that we need to be vigilant about. And so I think a big part of our role as elected officials is to keep faith and to encourage young people to really to be 2 feet in on this issue. And so on campus, that means getting involved with student organizations like yours. And congratulations to those of you who've already done that. Encourage others. But equally, I've had the fortune to work with a number of other organizations that are very, very engaged on the issue of anti-Semitism and on more broadly advocating for Jewish priorities, whether it's CEJA or the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal or B'nai B'rith or CJPAC. I mean, there are many different opportunities for young people to become involved, to become educated, and most importantly, for you to express your own ideas, to bring your own purchase into what it means to be a person of Jewish identity and faith and culture. And that can take many different forms. And, in my discussions with young people, I'm always impressed about, how profound your own thinking is on these issues. So, yes, as a parliamentarian, I think we collectively have a responsibility to call out anti-Semitism, but equally, I think there is an imperative there to work with young people to make sure that your voices are heard. And so I would just say, keep faith. You are doing a good thing by showing up tonight, by listening to us. But more importantly, we want to step out of the way and give you the space to be leaders as you already are. And this is an issue where we need you, where we need voices from across society to come together. Whether you're a person of Jewish heritage or whether you are a person of another religious community or of no faith whatsoever, I come back to the point that I made earlier. This can't be a partisan issue. It's got to be one that unites us. And I think that as Canadians, we can be proud that we have made some real progress on that, not only in the adoption of some of the policy instruments that I've already referred to, IRA, the Security Infrastructure Program, but equally, we're starting to see, other forums like the Interparliamentary Task Force that my former colleague, Michael Levitt and Erwin Kotler have helped lead, but that we now see members of our current parliament, including Anthony Housefather, take membership in. There are many ways, I think, for young people to be involved, and those are just a few examples. Over to you, Peter and James.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in. I agree with you entirely, Marco. Well, I'm certainly disappointed that successive presidents at York University, for example, have failed to ensure proper governance, proper handling of the many millions of dollars of student fees that are collected every year and very often to be used in generating hate, Israel Apartheid Week, and so forth. When I go to York, when I'm in a crowded room with Hillel, and there are chants downstairs criticizing the appearance of a member of parliament and siding with with members of a group that are very often running, as I said, a gauntlet to get into their room. I suggest that students have got to stand up, and in the annual elections, getting rid of the Canadian Federation of Students at York would be a huge step forward. It's happened on other university campuses. UBC got rid of the Federation. When they come to the Hill every year to lobby us as politicians, I always raise the way that they have manipulated and interfered with the electoral process at York University, which I've seen firsthand over a number of years. And they always deflect and deny. But I understand this year, the good news on York is that there will be electronic voting. There won't be the opportunity for ballot box movement or ballot box stuffing. And that will be a huge step if students stand up, participate using social media in its positive ways. And I agree with my colleagues that social media has been one of the most destructive and inflammatory aspects of inflaming the new anti-Semitism. But it really does come down on campus to getting a responsible student union that is tolerant of all and which encourages the sort of campus life that every university student, not only in Canada, around the world, but every student deserves at this time of life. I agree also that participation in groups like CJPAC, CJA in its own way, B'nai B'rith, other organizations. There are a couple of new organizations which have been founded in recent years. But it's to be active and to participate, to listen and to speak up, to join the conversation, not to leave to politicians to condemn, an act of vandalism or an act of violence or a threat or an atrocity, but to participate. The annual Walk with Israel has always been an inspiration for me, and it's great to see the community out celebrating and to see, for the most part, an acceptance by the non-Jewish communities. In a way, I'm a little sorry that the last one was the first one that didn't go through downtown Toronto, and it was a pretty chilly day when we walked North York. But again, all of these organizations and celebrations, celebrating with joy the festivals, and recognizing the contribution that many other religious communities, not just the extremists in those communities, are quite willing and enthusiastic to share with the Jewish community. James?
Yes, thank you, Peter, and Marco. I agree with everything you've said, but I will say, this whole idea of getting involved. I know it sounds like a cliche, but it is so important. Voting in these campus elections, running candidates who advocate for fairness and respect on our campuses, mobilizing to make sure that those candidates who want to divide people, who want to get people against each other, who have agendas and axes to grind, those are the candidates we don't want in student government. Another thing, as mentioned, the various advocacy organizations, always good to go to their events, to stay engaged, whether it be CJA, CJPAC, Canadian Friends of Simon Wiesenthal, that former MP Michael Levitt is now running, and of course, B'nai B'rith and others. Getting involved with them, they're always looking for volunteers. It's great to be involved. Going to Israel, always great to say when you're refuting some of the smear campaign against Israel is, look, I've been there. And what you're saying is nonsense, because the amount of ignorance about the state of Israel is pretty shocking. And if you say you've gone, it changes the conversation pretty quickly. Now, I realize it's not a cheap trip, but there is birthright. There's opportunities to go for free. And I would say that getting involved, not just in campus elections, but getting involved in federal, provincial, and municipal elections is involved, helping your local candidates, supporting candidates who are a good voice for the Jewish community, and who will advocate and not be afraid to speak out. You know, when I was at York, and I know this dates me a little bit, I was there from 78 to 82, and there was none of this mayhem, this anti-Israel mayhem. It was a great place to go. It was an enjoyable campus. I enjoyed my studies. I had fun there. It was a wonderful place. And when I look at what's happened now, it's really sort of sad that it's turned into this. And it's also important to remember that those who stand behind the charter as freedom of speech often want the freedom of speech for themselves, but not anyone else. And I was once accosted at a town hall meeting that I was hosting from someone that we put out a statement calling their actions anti-Semitic, and he asked for an apology. And I said I wasn't going to apologize. And we went back and forth several times, and I finally said, you know, you have the freedom. You want the freedom to make racial slurs. I have the freedom to condemn it and call it what it is. So freedoms are not just for you; they're for everybody. And he didn't have much to say after that. So activism, getting involved in elections, running candidates who support our values, support our views, getting involved in third-party organizations, making sure the administration of these campuses know that we're concerned. We cannot be pushed around or remain silent. Those are the keys to getting involved in combating a lot of the anti-Semitism on campus. And, you know, I think I mentioned in my opening remarks, very briefly, I met with the leadership of one of the universities and asked for some tough action after a major incident there. And she said, look, if I do that, there'll be riots over here. So that there's no red lines anymore. There's no shame. In other words, the groups that hate us or hate Israel, there's no, they're not worried about their reputation. They're not worried about pounding on doors or screaming or making racial slurs. And that is disconcerting because Canada always had those red lines, and we always had that kind of important barrier or red lines that you would never cross, and people are crossing them now. Thank you.
For all of those answers. The next question that was raised, an issue at the University of Toronto is both the undergraduate and graduate student unions perpetrating anti-Semitism, taking the form of BDS resolutions and opposing kosher food on campus, which was a very large incident that happened last year. Are there any government limits in place to provide checks and balances on the student union's power on campus?
Well,
go ahead.
Are you sure?
Let's keep.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, no, I think this is a really important question. I just want to begin by saying that I'm very proud that of the position that the Prime Minister has taken in opposition to BDS. And this is something that he's been speaking out against going back to 2015 when he opposed the Israel apartheid movements that we've seen on various campuses and which have been very offensive. And it has extended right through our entire time in government. And I just want to pause to underline that this is precisely why the IRA definition and adopting it by our government is important, and how it can be a tool for universities to inform their policies on campus, because it lists in very practical examples the kinds of ways in which we are seeing anti-Semitism manifest. And as I said earlier, and I think Peter and James have also highlighted, that there are various ways in which anti-Semitism is taking place, including in the form of BDS, which is a form of singling out, often a form of singling out Israel. It's it's about delegitimizing and dehumanizing Jewish people. And so it's important to begin by calling it out for what it is. I think by extension, we also need to engage at every level of government, campus administrations, so that they are aware of this policy instrument, so that they can inform themselves what are the examples by which we are seeing anti-Semitism take place. And so by having that dialogue and by ensuring that that lens is put into place when policy decisions are taken by schools, universities, and colleges alike, that they are truly informed. And so I think it's really important to begin with that proposition. The second thing is, and this is something else that's come up, is online hatred is a new phenomenon for an old form of discrimination and hate. And I think, again, here, the definition of IRA can inform decisions which are taken by law enforcement, including police officers and Crown prosecutors, in whether or not it's appropriate to lay charges. And so I think that that is another example of how the IRA definition will be of benefit to schools and administrations as they take their decisions. And with that, I'm happy now to turn it over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Marco. Well, and I certainly hailed the government's announcement that it was adopting the IRA definition, but I still encourage, and I used to bend Michael Levitt's ear on regular occasions, that some countries have actually formally ratified it by their parliament or their governments. And I would like to see IRA brought to the floor of the House of Commons. Call me a traditionalist, but I'd like to see the House of Commons, the Parliament of Canada, the beating heart of our democracy, actually formally ratify IRA. And with regards to the contents of that definition, we also need, with the Interparliamentary Coalition to combat anti-Semitism, one of the recommendations in the Ottawa Protocol was that police forces across Canada, prosecutors and the judiciary be better informed about exactly the sorts of acts of anti-Semitism, low key and much higher key, and with regards to violence and intimidation, to better ensure that our society does remain civil and that our society does refuse to accept overt acts of hate, anti-Semitism first among them. And we also need to encourage, and this is where student bodies can actually play their part in encouraging not only the presidents of universities and the administrators, but the boards of directors of universities to more aggressively, I guess, to more forcefully ensure that campus life is appropriate, that hate doesn't manifest itself in any way, whether in, the new anti-Semitism, in BDS rallies, in Israel Apartheid Week. The Ottawa Protocol encouraged universities and university organizations to actually stage counter events during Israel Apartheid Week, and some university campuses have tried that with a measure of success. But I think it really comes down to folks not looking the other way when they see what they think might be anti-Semitism, because then gradually that grows, and the societal acceptance of more and more aggressive and hateful forms of anti-Semitism are allowed to condition society to look the other way or to accept. So I think IRA was a great advantage to those who face that argument from those who say anti-Semitism is a form of free speech, that BDS is a form of free speech, not a deliberate act to destroy Israel, which it is, which it was created to do, to destroy the economy of Israel and ultimately the existence of Israel.
I guess it's my turn. There's no one else left. So we refer to government resources. So a very important point, a very important question. The nation state or governments, whether municipal, provincial, federal, they are there primarily to protect its people with either with a standing army or with a police force or with an independent judiciary, with human rights commissions. These are really important tools, and they're there to protect people. And if they're not protecting people, then they have failed. And I see the other levels of government who have taken steps in that direction. Certainly, when it comes to the courts, the courts are there to take legal action. I remember at the school board, the head lawyer there said you can be sued for the color of your tie. So why can't we be litigating some of these groups that are obstructing free speech, that are compromising our human rights, seizing bank accounts, getting judgments against them, and going through to our law school students for pro bono work. There's also human rights commissions, which prove a mixed bag of results, filing complaints with human rights commissions. You want to bog down these student unions. You want to tie them up in litigation and in hearings. You want to put their demonization on trial. When it comes to police services, what we want at some of these events where police are present are what we call occurrence reports. And there should be an officer at each of these events taking notes, which then go to a review panel, internal review panel, to see whether any hate crimes were committed. If they were, then it goes up to the Attorney General's office up at Queen's Park, and then they would decide whether charges are laid. So engaging police services, the courts, the judicial system, law schools, pro bono, human rights commissions, and putting pressure on the leadership of these universities to make sure that they're keeping peace on campus and that everyone is entitled to the respect and dignity that they deserve during their university years. And the leaders of these universities should not be afraid to take a principled stand against some of the hateful comments and hateful actions that take place, no matter what the consequences. And that's a tough ask, but I think it's fair enough in this day and age. So those are my suggestions for government resources that are there, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much for all those answers. I know a lot of us were taking notes during those. So the next question, the Canadian federal government announced on June 25th of last year that the IRA definition of anti-Semitism would be adopted as part of the government's anti-racism strategy, which all of you incorporated in your last answers. How is this beneficial to us on campus, and how can we use it?
Peter, you want why don't you go first this time, Peter, and I'll go after.
Sure. Well, to use it, it needs to be disseminated. Folks have to digest it, and there are a variety of ways of doing it. But essentially, it's a form of marketing. I think that we have to get. I can remember in the 1960s when ecumenical. There was a coming together of all of the faiths, and there were three very strong religious leaders, one Jewish, one Catholic, one Muslim. And the three of them, for a period of years in the 60s and 70s, addressed issues as we are addressing now, the most recent sort of incarnation of issues, again, fueled and inflamed by social media and in many ways an uninformed public. And I think that what we have to do with IRA is make sure that Canadians know what it says. And we have to do that at the same time that we address hate expressed against other minorities or other religious faiths. there is an awful lot of knuckle dragging out there in the extreme ends of all political spectrums, where a casual comment on Twitter in 1 minute can within 5 minutes erupt into a firestorm of hate and really unacceptable, intimidating. I mean, it drives people out of society. It makes people take cover. And I think what we have to do is more enthusiastically address these issues up front and do it in a constructive way, not to, you know, as I said, the Bloc Québécois back in 2010 dropped out of the interparliamentary organization because they were convinced by, in many cases, radical thinkers on a number of university campuses who in very articulate ways could make very hateful defense, very unacceptable defenses of hate as free speech. So I think that IRA has got to be a touchstone for people whenever they hear something, whenever they hear an argument, whenever they hear a debate, when they see a BDS protest and a banner, they can in their head say, does that offend the definition in this particular aspect?
Yeah, I certainly agree with Peter around the need to ensure that the definition is disseminated and that it's understood. But I think in addition to that, I would say that it's important that we, you know, not stop there at education, but really find a way to measure the success of campuses and schools and organizations who are part of educating life are adhering to the principles of the IRA definition as well. And that means coming back to it, being transparent, as organizations are generating reports on the state of anti-Semitism on campuses, that they do it through the lens of the definition and the examples that have been referred to. And so I think it can also be a measure. It can be an instrument that can measure our progress at combating anti-Semitism. And so I do think that there is a real interchange there that builds on distribution and education and actually translates into you know, showing progress in combating anti-Semitism. But otherwise, I mean, I think Peter's covered a lot of good ground there, and happy to now pass the mic over to James.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I mean, what I like about IRA is it's, you know, in what the anti-Semites usually say is they say, oh, no, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just anti-Israel, you know, and it reminds me of the time when we were trying to shut down Queers Against Israeli Apartheid, and which was sort of the calling card for the left at that time. At that time, there were 77 countries around the world that criminalized homosexuality, and Israel was not among them. In fact, Israel was a safe haven in the Middle East for those seeking persecution based on sexual orientation. And yet, the most frustrating part was Pride Parade, and with its hosting of Kwaya, was going after the one country in the Middle East that was providing this safe haven. And we must be able to say that that the anti-Israel demonization, isolation, delegitimization is a fig leaf for anti-Semitism. There is no way that you can possibly justify this kind of venom against Israel and still love the Jewish people. I mean, it just doesn't make sense at all. And when it comes to you know, BDS, that is simply an act born out of ignorance, born out of prejudice. These groups are not calling for a boycott of countries with some of the most heinous human rights abuses worldwide that have been pulled up before the World Court. that have been censured by various human rights organizations. They don't say a word about all those other countries and launching some kind of boycott against them. They decide that the only Jewish country in the Middle East, the only Jewish nation on earth, deserves to have its goods boycotted, and it's done in a very malicious way. I tried to move a motion at council to include it in some of our procurement to make sure we did no business with BDS supporters, and out came the outcry of free speech, and it's, you know, this isn't right, and he's trying to censor us. And these are councillors, these are elected officials. And we were waiting for a better day when we had the votes to get that done. So is this a good step? I think it is. And I think governments that adopt it are on the right track. I think you need a parallel legal track where you're, and many states in the United States have done it, where you've made it illegal for companies to participate in any kind of BDS action. And it's something that we have to watch very close. We have to promote it wherever we can. And I hope one day to bring it on the floor of City Council when we know we have the votes to get it done here in the good city of Toronto. So it's a vital conversation, and we have to keep working on that. It's a very important, impressive move and definition. And I think it creates clarity to the long simmering debate of separating anti-Israel views and anti-Semitism. And in fact, they are one and the same.
Thank you so much. Yeah, SSI has been pushing the IRA definition for years because exactly like you guys all summarized, it clarifies anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism so well. The last question that we have today is, what is the importance of non-partisan support of Israel and condemnation of anti-Semitism throughout all levels of government?
Everything you've just seen. You know, people working across different governments and across different parties to come together to for a common cause, and that is to stamp out anti-Semitism. And you know, I think in addition to all of the examples and the questions that we've taken tonight, you know, I remember shortly after I became a minister late last year, before the world turned upside down, that I had the occasion to travel to Montreal and to speak to Jewish community leaders there. And this was on the heels of an incident which you may all recall, involving Jordan Wright, who's a student at McGill, who got involved, who decided to run for office and become part of her student union, who got involved with her faculty as an RA in science, and who was engaged and, you know, was going to travel on a sponsored trip by Hillel Montreal, and who was put to an ultimatum to either not take the trip or resign. And I had the chance to meet Jordan in Montreal, and I have to tell you that her strength, her resolve was a real inspiration to me as a parliamentarian. And I think to everybody who was in that room. And I just think it's important to conclude on a positive, uplifting, inspirational note that while we're in the midst of this pandemic and these unprecedented times that have in some ways exacerbated discrimination, bias, anti-Semitism, hate across all bands of society, that it's the young people that we're looking to as a source of motivation and inspiration to keep doing the work. You know, she stood her ground. She's still involved. She didn't capitulate to that. And I think a big part of that is not because it's easy, because it's not. And you could certainly see that, you know, she was grappling with, you know, her own convictions and how to reconcile that. She shouldn't have to be put to that dilemma. None of you should have to be put to that kind of an ultimatum. You all have the right, the fundamental right, to be able to go to school, get an education, achieve your full potential. And I think it's our job in government and across society to ensure that those conditions exist. And that certainly has to involve staying very vigilant on the issue of anti-Semitism, something that I'm committed to doing. And so I want to thank you for the opportunity for having this conversation tonight.
Well said, Marco. And I'd just like to say there are two dimensions of addressing anti-Semitism. One, the domestic challenges that we face and that we see, as I said, as the world's oldest hate manifests itself just among our society. And then secondly, the anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, the new anti-Semitism in the global context. And the point was raised earlier, how important it is that folks understand the reality of Israel when it was born, Israel as it has defended itself. It is not an expanding country of occupation. It has fought a number of defensive wars, and it has, in many ways, liberated territory. As you know, as Benjamin Netanyahu said during our visit there with Prime Minister Harper, the condominiums, the apartments, were never the issue in the War of Independence. That war, Yom Kippur, the Intifadas, have all been aimed at the ultimate destruction of Israel. That there's been no acceptance. Fortunately, today we're seeing peace treaties, and I'm inspired by the increasing number of countries in the Arab world which are signing not only peace agreements but significant trade agreements. But the fight is far from over, and I think that. Just as my eyes were open to the vulnerability of a magnificent nation state back in 1973 when I went to Israel to unfortunately cover war, but fortunately a war that Israel won after coming precariously close to not. I think it's important that our parliamentarians go. I've been to Israel scores of time over the last half century, but many of my fellow parliamentarians haven't, and they've taken advantage of invitations from various Canadian groups, CIJA, for example, or from the government of Israel, to visit and to see what a leader Israel is in science, in medicine, in health, in the environment. It's really important that Canada, that the world knows more about just what a magnificent country democratic Israel is. And with that, I think I'll hand it over to James to wrap up. But thank you again for the invitation tonight, and I hope it's been helpful. The content, the comments that I've offered.
Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you, Marco. Non-partisan, very important. Whenever I'm at, big event, whether it be a big fundraiser or a guest speaker, or maybe even a smaller event, I always look around at the roster of elected officials who are there, and it always is heartening to see representatives from our three major political parties. And, I hate to admit it, but politicians do come and go. And it's important to always have a foot in each political party to make sure there's a voice there when it comes to Israel and the Jewish community. And sometimes it's just very simple things that we just need a hearing on. And other times it's far more complex. Whether it be liberal, conservative, NDP, I think we need the support of all the parties. We need them to stand behind the Jewish community and the values that we represent. We went on a trade mission to Israel a few years ago with the mayor. We were supposed to go on another one. Actually, we probably would have been on it in about 2 weeks. Obviously, it's been canceled. And what we want on these trade missions is bipartisan support. Although here it's tripartisan support. We want people who are the skeptics, so we can educate them. We want people who are the supporters, so they can take the stories, the positive stories back. But also we want them to take them back to their various political parties and their caucuses and be able to refute much of the smear campaign, distortions and lies about the state of Israel, and of course, the Jewish people. So, but to summarize, yes, we must have all people. It can't be a partisan issue. We need the voices from all political parties and all ends of the ideological spectrum. And we must wrestle away this calling card for the left, who have wrapped around this as if it's the modern kind of anti-Vietnam cause of the 60s, that you have to rally around the anti-Israel messaging to be part of our group, whether it be the unions, whether it be the NDP, whether it be various other groups. We must reach out, and we must get them included, and we must enlighten them. And I can see from this meeting where you've got two levels of government. I guess next time we'll have the provincial government here, but you've got two political parties and a non-partisan here, speaking very openly about our support for the state of Israel and our fight against anti-Semitism. And I think that's a very important thing. So to answer the final question, yes, we need all levels of government, municipal, provincial, federal, all political parties with the message of respect and dignity and anti-racism, tolerance, and of course a fight against anti-Semitism and anti-Israel demonization. So with that, I don't know whether we get a 2-minute wrap up, but I wanted to thank everybody for this lovely invitation.
I think that was it, James. I think that was it. You did a great job.
I'm out of time. You're
Well
kidding.
done.
Usually the speaker cuts me off. But I want to thank everybody for holding this forum and this discussion, and thank all the students who have listened in. I hope it's been valuable. And of course, if there's anything more I can do to help, you can always call my office, or I'm sure you can call Marco or Peter as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Minister Mendicino, MP Kent, and Councillor Pasternak. This event has mobilized so much of our student community, and it's easily going to be one of the highlights of our entire year at SSI. We're so grateful for your attendance, and hopefully we can host you in person once this is over for a more exciting event. So thank you so much, and mostly thank you so much for your support of us as we fight anti-Semitism on campus. So that wraps up our event. Thank you again, and have a good evening, everybody.
Okay,
thank you, Nina. You did a wonderful job moderating. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank Nina, and be safe out there.
Thank you. Bye, Peter. Bye, James.
Bye-bye. Bye,
Bye,
all.
Marco. Bye, Peter.